Have you ever received an invitation only to be followed by a cold message saying, "Sorry, there's not enough room," as if your very existence was somehow extraneous? I have. And the bitterest part isn't being left out of a party, it's that the ones crossing my name off the list were the very people who share my blood. My name is Rachel Carter, 32 years old, born and raised in Boston. The Carter family. Sounds prestigious, doesn't it? People often associate the name with fancy law offices, glass skyscrapers, and society page galas. But me, a different kind of Carter, I'm usually mentioned in hushed tones, or worse, with deliberate silence. That day, a shimmering teal envelope arrived at my office. One glance, and I knew where it came from. Emblazoned on the front was elegant script. Carter Family Gathering, the Harrington, Boston, July 12th, 6 o'clock p.m. A family event, presented like a diplomat's gala. I sat quietly, my fingers tracing the embossed patterns. Oddly, my heart didn't race with excitement but with a vague premonition, the kind those who've tasted exclusion would understand. Don't get your hopes up. And sure enough, my gut wasn't wrong. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Sophie, my cousin, the one always tasked with delivering the family's tough news in a sugar-coated tone, like sprinkling sugar on a sour lemon slice. "Rachel, just a heads up. This year we have lots of out-of-town guests, and seating is limited. It's a bit of a black tie affair. Hope you understand." There it was, the heart emoji, as if a knife stab hurts less when it's pink and sparkly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the text. Limited seating. What a laugh. They'd rented the entire ballroom at the Harrington, a venue that could hold over 400 guests. If there wasn't room for me, they must have invited the entire U.S. Senate. I set my phone down, glancing at the still unopened envelope. For a moment, I was 12 again, standing in the corner of my grandparents' living room during a lively Thanksgiving dinner. I remember my father, Richard Carter, raising a glass of brandy, his voice dripping with philosophy. There are two kinds of people in this world, those who carry the name and those who carry the burden. He scanned the table, his eyes pausing on me. I didn't fully grasp it then, but a child's intuition told me I wasn't in the first group, and for decades after, his words hung over me like a suspended sentence. I'm used to being sidelined, weddings, birthdays, my cousins' graduations, occasions where they shone in expensive tuxedos while I sat quietly in the back row or wasn't invited at all. This time was no different, except they were kind enough to send the invitation before scratching my name off. A subtle reminder, we still remember you, but only to cross you out. Truthfully, it doesn't sting as much as it used to. Pain over time turns to scar tissue. Now, it's just a wry half-smile, bitter yet self-mocking. Turns out a true Carter like me isn't good enough to share their table. But there's one detail that made me laugh out loud, genuinely, not sarcastically. The Harrington, Boston. Yes, the five-star hotel they chose for their gathering is part of the chain I founded, Aurora Hospitality. Of course, they have no idea. To them, I'm still the girl who cleaned rooms in a cheap motel, not the CEO behind an international brand. They sent the ballroom rental contract through our corporate booking portal under the name Carter Family. My team flagged it as urgent, and the one who approved that contract? Me. On paper, they were treated like any VIP client, but deep down, I knew this would be a very different evening. Holding the envelope again, I shook my head. They thought they'd locked me out, but they didn't know I held the keys to the building. Fate, it seems, has a sharper sense of humor than any scriptwriter. I set the envelope down and pulled a small wooden frame from my drawer. Inside was a worn plastic badge, my name, Rachel, Housekeeping, etched at an angle. A scratch ran across housekeeping, as if time itself wanted to erase it. I've kept it for over a decade. Back when I wore it, even after shifts, it was a reminder. If you want to change, start with your own hands and self-respect. Looking back, I find it amusing. An entire family obsessed with their polished image, terrified of a granddaughter who once held a mop. They didn't hate me for failing, they hated me for choosing a path they couldn't control. You might ask, why do I still care? Why not cut ties and move on? I've asked myself that 1,000 times. But when your name is carved into a family tree, you don't easily forget them, even when they've erased you from every family photo. The longing to be acknowledged, even once, is hard to shake. I leaned back, letting my thoughts spiral. Outside, June rain drizzled over Boston. The streaks on the window blurred with neon lights from the street below, mirroring my mood, murky, radiant, and incomprehensible. In that moment, I realized something. The invitation wasn't the issue. The seat in that ballroom wasn't the issue. The real problem was that I'd let them define my worth for too long. I tucked the framed badge into my bag. If they wouldn't invite me as family, I'd show up as the owner. And I wouldn't need to shout or prove myself endlessly. The truth alone would silence the room. That night, I told myself, Rachel, this time, you're not here to beg for a seat. You're here to remind them this house belongs to you. Maybe some of you have felt this too, being excluded from a place you should belong, whether it's family, friends, or a community. It hurts, but it doesn't define you. I learned to rise from that disdain. What about you? Leave a comment and let me know. If you were in my shoes, would you stay silent or rewrite your own story? They say every family has its timeless sayings, words of wisdom meant to be etched into your soul. For the Carters, that saying came from my father, Richard Carter, during a Thanksgiving dinner when I was 12. He raised his brandy glass in the firelight, his voice low and commanding, as if delivering an absolute truth. There are two kinds of people in this world, those who uphold the name and those who bear the burden. The table fell silent. He scanned each face, my well-dressed cousins, my mother sitting ramrod straight like a wax statue, and me, fumbling with an intricately folded napkin. I wasn't sure I fully understood him then, but I understood his eyes. When they landed on me, all doubt vanished. In his gaze, I was the burden. That was the first moment I grasped my place in the family. Not the daughter expected to carry the legacy, not the pride to be showcased to society. I was the pause in their loud symphony, existing only to be compared and diminished. The burden label stuck, applied by my father in countless ways. He didn't need to yell. A casual remark was enough to render my efforts meaningless. I still remember the first time I won a school writing contest. I rushed home, beaming, hoping for a word of praise. He glanced at the paper and shrugged. Good job, but are you planning to be a starving writer? In this family, we write contracts, not fairy tales. I folded the essay and stuffed it at the bottom of a drawer. From that day, I never showed him another piece of my writing. But the breaking point came when I dared to ask a question at the family company. I was 23, fresh out of hospitality management school. Instead of job hunting elsewhere, I was assigned to Caldwell Financial, a Carter investment branch. They even prepared an office with a nameplate, Rachel Carter, Strategic Development. It was a stage set for me to recite someone else's script. At first I tried. I showed up on time, wore the standard suit, listened to hours of meetings about profits, charts, and restructuring plans. I'm not good at pretending, so when I heard about laying off longtime employees to cut costs, I raised my hand. If they've dedicated their lives to the company, is there a way to keep them? Or at least offer a decent pension? The room went silent. People stared as if I'd missed a beat. My father, at the head of the table, tapped his fingers on the polished wood. He didn't respond then, but that afternoon he called me into his office. The room was vast, oak-paneled, his desk gleaming. He sat behind it like a supreme judge. His voice was cold and sharp. Rachel, what do you think you're doing? I swallowed but stayed calm. I just wanted to understand. They've worked here for decades. Why treat them like disposable goods? He leaned back, his eyes bloodshot. You lack vision. You focus on trivial things. A leader cuts the excess, or the whole tree dies. You think too small. I stood frozen. No vision. His words hit like a hammer, snuffing out the fragile flame I'd been nurturing. In that moment, I knew I'd never be valued here, at least not in his eyes. The next day, I packed up my office, leaving the pristine nameplate behind. No one stopped me. In fact, they probably sighed in relief when I disappeared. From then on, the distance between my father and me wasn't arguments, it was a wall of silence. My birthdays he didn't show. Thanksgiving he raised his glass without mentioning my name. All that remained was the image of him beaming beside my cousins, the ones who uphold the name. At first, I tormented myself. Was I really lacking vision? Was I naive to care about employees who weren't family? But the farther I got, the clearer it became. The problem wasn't me. In my father's world, human dignity didn't show up on a balance sheet. And because I refused to play by those rules, I had to be the burden. The irony? The more he called me a burden, the more I learned to carry my own weight. He thought he was dismissing me, but his rejection pushed me onto a path he never predicted. Sometimes I still see his eyes in that meeting room, half scorn, half disappointment. But instead of weakening me, it was like a stone thrown into a lake, creating ripples that never fade. Those ripples carried me away from the family, toward my own path. I don't know if anyone here has been labeled something unwanted by family: weak, useless, failure. Trust me, those words carry weight. They creep into your mind, press on your chest when you try to breathe freely. But I also believe they're not your fate. I turned burden into fuel to build something bigger than the family name they were so proud of. He never knew that the moment he said, "You lack vision," I started seeing farther than ever. Do you believe one of the most important days of your life, like your college graduation, could unfold before rows of empty seats where your family should have been? I'll never forget that feeling. Standing on a brightly lit stage, spotlights in my face, the loudspeaker calling my name with the highest honors in hospitality management, while below, the row reserved for my family was a long, cold stretch of empty chairs. I studied at the University of Washington, not as glamorous as the Harvard or Yale my father idolized, but to me, it was paradise. I found dedicated professors, friends who worked night shifts like me to pay tuition, people who didn't mind wearing restaurant uniforms and rushing to morning classes. It was the first place I felt undefined by the Carter name. For 4 years, I threw myself into studying and working. I was a morning receptionist, a weekend waitress, even scrubbed floors at an Italian restaurant to afford textbooks. I fell asleep at library desks more often than in my dorm bed. But it was worth it. I graduated top of my class. On graduation day, I eagerly donned my navy cap and gown, pinning on my honors medal. Around me, friends were photographed by parents, hugged by grandparents, showered with flowers by siblings. The air smelled of roses and Starbucks coffee from parents' hands, filled with laughter and applause, a scene bursting with joy. And me? I stared at the empty row marked, "Reserved for Carter Family." The organizers had thoughtfully set aside a section for my family, but no one came, not a single soul. My mother texted that morning. "Sorry, honey, your father has an urgent meeting. We couldn't make it." A curt message, no congratulations. I read it over and over, searching for warmth, but felt only a chill down my spine. When the MC called, "Rachel Carter, summa cum laude," the auditorium erupted in applause. But it felt foreign, as if they were clapping for someone else. I stepped onto the stage, bowed, took my diploma from the dean. I smiled for the ceremony, but my eyes blurred as I glanced at the empty seats. For a moment I imagined my father there, arms crossed, eyes proud for once. I pictured my mother standing, waving, shouting, "Bravo, my girl!" I even heard the applause I'd craved since childhood, but it was a cruel trick of the mind. When I blinked, the illusion vanished, leaving only cold chairs and the Carter family sign. On that stage, I realized I was done dreaming. My family would never show up to cheer for me. I could earn top marks, win every award, but to them, I'd always be the visionless burden. They wouldn't acknowledge my success. It would disrupt the script they'd written for me. In that moment, a strange emotion surged, not just sadness, but a cold clarity. If they wouldn't be my audience, I'd perform for myself. After the ceremony, my friends fell into their family's arms, clutching flowers, snapping photos, laughter echoing. I stood on the sidelines, gripping my diploma, trying not to cry. A classmate, Sarah, came over and pressed a white rose into my hand. "Rachel, you're amazing. Don't let empty seats make you forget that." I smiled but thought, Those empty seats are why I'll never forget. That night, alone in my tiny apartment, I hung my diploma on the wall with a rusty nail. No party, no celebratory wine, just instant noodles and a can of soda from the convenience store. But I lit a small candle and raised a glass to the mirror. Congrats, Rachel. You did it. They say childhood wounds are the hardest to heal. I agree, but I also realize they create the tough skin that keeps you standing. From that day, I stopped waiting for my family to call my name. I'd carve it myself, where they couldn't erase it. What's more bitter than realizing family ties can be an illusion? But nothing is stronger than the moment you accept that truth and choose to rely on yourself. The next day, I tucked my diploma into a wooden box, not showing it to anyone. I started job hunting, no longer caring if they acknowledged me. Because if I wanted to build a real life, it had to start with my own hands, not their approving glances. And that was the day I truly grew up. Not when I got my diploma, but when I understood that empty seats could speak louder than 1,000 words. Do you find this story compelling? If yes, comment Y. If not, comment N. I want your honest thoughts, because sometimes painful truths spark a remarkable journey. Do you believe a tiny piece of plastic with your name hastily printed on it could become a weapon for an entire family to mock you? I know it can, because that small housekeeping badge, pinned to my chest during shifts at a rundown motel on the outskirts, turned me into the punchline of the Carter family group chat. After leaving my father's company, I had no glamorous options. No brightly lit offices, no glossy business cards. I applied everywhere, small restaurants, 3-star hotels, but no one was eager to hire a Carter gone rogue. So I took the only job no one fought for, cleaning rooms at an old motel off the highway. If you want to hear more stories and struggles like mine that resonate with you, check out my previous videos on this channel. The motel job wasn't glamorous. Changing sheets, emptying trash, scrubbing toilets, spraying air freshener to mask cigarette smoke. The cleaning chemicals sank into my hands until I couldn't smell my own perfume. The guests were a mix. Long-haul workers, secret lovers, drunks passed out on the floor. I did what many in my family called lowly work. One evening, Sophie, my oft-mentioned cousin, happened to be in town. I don't know who snapped a photo of my Rachel housekeeping badge on the shift board, but a day later, it was in the family group chat. Someone captioned it, "The girl who wanted to clean toilets finally got her wish." A flood of laughing emojis followed, a parade of mockery. Not one person defended me. Even Aunt Janine, who sometimes showed sympathy, stayed silent. That silence hurt more than the taunts. I sat in my dingy rented room, reading each message, my heart heavy as stone. Part of me wanted to smash my phone. Another part wanted to save it all as proof I never belonged. In the end, I did the unexpected. I carefully removed the housekeeping badge from my uniform, wiped it clean, and placed it in a small wooden frame I bought at a flea market. Why keep it instead of throwing it away? Because I understood that what others see as shame can become a foundation. If they thought it was my lowest mark, I'd use it to remind myself, from here, there's only up. In that motel, I learned lessons no classroom could teach. I learned to read guests' emotions from the wrinkles in their sheets. I learned to gauge their mood by whether they left a tip or didn't. I learned that to serve someone, you must touch what they don't say out loud. Those skills later helped me build Aurora Hospitality, where every detail revolves around kindness. One memory sticks with me. Late one night, an elderly guest from Texas stumbled in, exhausted from a long drive. He slumped in the lobby chair, head bowed. I brought him a glass of water and a warm towel. He looked up, eyes red. "Thank you, nobody's treated me like a person all day." Those words sank deep. Sometimes, the greatest value you offer is simply seeing someone. But to the Carter family, it all boiled down to a housekeeping badge, a joke. They didn't care what I learned or endured. They only saw a chance to reinforce their narrative, the wayward daughter, the disgrace to the Carter name. If you want to know why my family was so harsh, check out my video about the dinners where they deliberately seated me at the end of the table. Their art of subtle erasure, using absence to wipe me from the family portrait, is what I once called sophisticated deletion. But in that time of humiliation, I formed a belief. Others can mock you, but they can't decide what you do next. Each time I pinned on that housekeeping badge, I told myself, this isn't a stain, it's a start. The more I heard their group chat jabs, the more I knew I had to prove myself through action, not words. One night, staring at the framed badge on my rented room's wall, I thought, what if, from this plastic badge, I could build an empire? It sounded crazy then, but that craziness drove me to leave Boston for Vermont, where I started from nothing. See, what they called my shame became my foundation. What they mocked in the group chat became the invisible logo stamped on every decision I made. Some beginnings are too humble to boast about, too small and insignificant in the world's eyes. But for me, everything started with those small things. A creaky attic in Vermont, where the ceiling was so low I had to duck every time I stood up. I left Boston on a foggy morning. My beat-up car carried a few clothes, a worn suitcase, and the wooden frame with my housekeeping badge. No goodbyes, no well wishes. I drove north, feeling strangely light, as if each mile cut an invisible tie to the Carter family. In Vermont, I found an old inn run by an elderly couple, Irene and Cal. It was once their pride, but over time it became a pit stop for truckers and budget travelers. I rented their smallest room, a slanted attic with peeling paint, a creaky single bed, and one window opening to a starry sky. Honestly, it was little more than a wooden box, but I loved it instantly, maybe because it bore no trace of my family. There, I could start anew without comparisons. On my first day, I wondered, what now? A Carter without the Carter name. The answer didn't come right away, but I started noticing what others overlooked. I saw guests struggling with faded signs, returning to the lobby to ask directions. I saw a flickering hallway light, forcing people to use their phones to navigate. I saw forced smiles as they entered rooms, unsure where the light switch was or when the creaky ceiling fan would stop. I had no money, but I had time and hands. So I started small, replacing bulbs, rewriting signs with a marker, leaving handwritten notes like, "Thank you for coming. Sleep well." I even placed wildflowers in old glass jars Irene had tucked away. Surprisingly, guests noticed. A couple from New York asked, "Are you the new manager? This place feels so much better than last time." I just smiled, hiding the spark of joy. I realized you don't need a big budget, just genuine care. That was when the idea sprouted. If a rundown inn could change guests' impressions with small touches, why not build a model based on kindness? Not ostentatious luxury with red carpets and chandeliers, but elegance through feeling valued. I started jotting notes. An old notebook became my record of observations. Soft yellow lights help guests sleep better. Clear signs save them embarrassment. Handwritten notes make them feel seen. I called it my kindness diary. Cal, the inn's owner, sometimes saw me scribbling and chuckled. "This girl's writing a novel about an old motel." I didn't correct him. I wasn't writing a novel. I was drafting a dreams foundation. One winter night, a snowstorm cut the power. Guests shuffled to the lobby, anxious. I gathered every candle we had, placed them on tables, and brought extra blankets to rooms. Irene watched, surprised. "You didn't have to do that, Rachel." I replied, "I can't sit still while people are shivering." In that moment I saw clearly. I was no longer the mocked housekeeper. I was someone who could bring safety to others. That night, guests gathered around the candlelit table, sharing stories, laughing. When the power returned, they clapped as if I'd saved them from the storm. I stood still. In that applause, I found what my family never gave me: recognition. From that tiny attic, I began to dream big. I calculated, if I saved enough, maybe one day I'd buy this inn. Not to turn it into a flashy resort, but to preserve its soul and improve every detail. A hotel where everyone, no matter their status, felt seen. You see, my loneliness and shame turned into drive. If you watched my video about the housekeeping badge, you'll understand. I never wanted to be belittled for my work. I wanted to build a place where housekeeping wasn't a stain, but the heart of service. I named that dream Aurora, meaning dawn, a new beginning. And yes, Aurora Hospitality was born in that Vermont attic, where I heard the wind whistle through the window cracks each night. I couldn't imagine that those scribbled notebook pages would, years later, lead me to run an international hotel chain. But it all began here, in a place so small no one bothered to remember. Some dreams start with a sticky note, a few scribbled numbers, and a recklessness that makes others shake their heads. Aurora began that way. And strangely, that recklessness saved me. I vividly remember the morning Irene called me to the kitchen, her voice a mix of sadness and resolve. "Rachel, we're getting old. This inn needs younger hands to carry on. We're selling. Know anyone interested?" I froze. This inn, with its peeling ceilings, narrow halls, and creaky fans, was where I first felt I could do something. The thought of it becoming a vacant lot or falling to someone chasing profit choked me. So I said the most reckless thing of my life: "I want to buy it." Irene smiled, probably thinking I was joking. But I wasn't. I had no money, true, but I had guest data I'd collected, a detailed renovation plan in my notebook, and most importantly, faith that a kind place would never fail. I spent sleepless nights writing a business proposal, knocking on bank doors, pitching to small investors. Most laughed, calling me delusional. But one local bank agreed to a mortgage, provided I managed it myself, and paid on time each quarter. I nodded, signed, and stepped into the biggest game of my life. The day I signed the deed, I was trembling but smiling. I knew every mistake, every flaw, would be mine. But at least I'd escaped a life dictated by others. I renamed the inn Aurora House Dawn because it was my dawn. Those first months, I did everything: swept floors, painted walls, arranged flowers, even taught myself to fix plumbing. But I didn't just upgrade the building. I transformed the experience. Every room got a handwritten note. "You're here now, you can rest." I trained the staff, used to cold service, to listen. Not robotic bows, but eye contact and real smiles. The results came faster than I expected. 5-star reviews flooded TripAdvisor and Yelp, small but warm. We felt welcomed like family. Aurora House was booked year-round, while bigger hotels nearby slashed prices in the off-season. Word spread, and within 2 years, I opened a second location, Aurora Ridge, on a New Hampshire hillside, perfect for fall foliage seekers. Then Aurora Harbor in Maine, a restored historic building turned boutique hotel by the sea. At each, I kept the core philosophy: luxury isn't in crystal or red carpets, it's in feeling respected. A neatly folded towel, a hot tea served at the right moment. A simple question: "How was your day?" That's the luxury of Aurora, the luxury of kindness. While other hotels boasted infinity pools, we boasted cozy rooms and staff who remembered guests' names. While they hung Swarovski chandeliers, we hung handwritten notes. And oddly, that's what made Aurora stand out. When I opened Aurora Harrington, Boston, the chain's most upscale location, I knew I'd come far from the mocked housekeeper. Guests here were executives, politicians, artists. They chose Aurora because they wanted to be treated as people, not walking wallets. But I kept my identity hidden. All assets were under Mr. Carter Holdings, a name most assumed belonged to a man. I liked the ambiguity. It let me work quietly, unnoticed by my family. To them, I was probably still the lost granddaughter somewhere. I didn't need to correct that. Silence was my best shield. Of course, I sometimes laughed bitterly. A local paper once wrote, "Aurora Hospitality, a chain founded by a mysterious investor." I wanted to shout, "Mysterious? It's me!" But I held back. No need to prove myself to the world. My success spoke for itself. Once, in the family group chat, someone shared a check-in photo at Aurora Harbor commenting, "Such a classy place. Wonder who the owner is. Must be loaded." I chuckled, typing a reply in my head. "Owner here. Thanks for paying the bill." But I didn't send it. Keeping the secret made the game more fun. If you saw my video about the family mocking my housekeeping badge, you'll get why I didn't reveal myself sooner. I wanted Aurora to succeed for itself, not because they had to acknowledge me. As Aurora grew, so did I. But deep down I knew this path would eventually collide with my family. And when the Carter family reunion was set at Aurora, Harrington, Boston, that collision arrived. If fate has a sense of humor, this was its priciest joke. The Carter family chose Aurora, Harrington, Boston for their annual reunion. Yes, the hotel in the chain I founded, the house they had no idea I'd built from scratch. I found out one May afternoon when my sales team sent an urgent contract for my approval. Booker's name? Sophie Carter. Yes, my cousin, the one who texted, "Sorry, limited seating, hope you understand." I read the contract, lips curling into a wry smile. The Harringtons' largest ballroom, full-service package, decor in teal and silver. A note added, "The Carter family is prestigious, please prioritize." Prioritize? I laughed at my desk. For years they thought flashing the Carter name opened every door. They didn't know this door was mine. I didn't hesitate. I signed the contract, adding subtle tweaks only I'd notice. All key staff that night would be my most trusted. Hannah for VIP service, Everett for ceremonial duties. I wanted every detail seamless, a stage set for the curtain to rise. But don't misunderstand. I wasn't planning revenge. I didn't need them humiliated in public. I just wanted, for once, them to face the truth. The burden they dismissed had built the roof they stood under. As the reunion neared, my heart raced. I wondered, when they saw my name on the big screen, what would they do? Panic? Rage? Or fall silent as usual? I bet on silence, their most refined weapon for erasing me. I remembered past reunions at other hotels, known only through photos, men in tuxedos, women in gowns, champagne glasses clinking under chandeliers. I was never invited. Or if I was, it came with pitying looks, as if I were a charity case. This year was different. They didn't invite me, but they walked into my house. And the irony? They had no clue. I spent days checking every detail. Tablecloth colors, lighting angles, the ballroom's subtle fragrance. I wanted perfection, so they'd have no excuse to nitpick. When the truth came out, I didn't want them clinging to any flaw to deny it. I wrote a special welcome card. May this evening remind you of where you truly come from and what never fades. I didn't sign it. I wanted their curiosity to build, making the reveal hit harder. The reunion day arrived. I didn't enter through the main lobby. I took the familiar staff hallway, still smelling of laundry, with carts clattering. I passed housekeepers changing shifts, nodding to them, recalling when I was one of them. That moment grounded me. From the control room, I watched the cameras. Carter guests arriving in the lobby. Some bragged about million-dollar deals. Others laughed falsely with champagne. I recognized each face. Sophie leading, radiant as a queen. My father, Richard, entering with calm authority. My mother, as always, beside him, eyes scanning every detail. They walked in, unaware every brick beneath their feet was mine. The irony deepened when I overheard Sophie boasting to a receptionist. "The owner prioritized us because we're Carters, obviously. A name gets you respect, you know?" Hannah, my trainee, smiled politely, her eyes glinting with mischief. She knew the truth. I stood behind the curtain, taking a deep breath. Tension built in my chest, but so did an excitement I'd never felt. This was the moment I'd waited for, not to win or lose, but to end years of denial. At 7:15, the ballroom dimmed. Everett stepped onto the stage, his voice warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, before the evening begins, please join us for a special introduction from the owner of Aurora, Harrington, Boston." In that moment, I saw Sophie freeze. She was surprised. Carters always assumed they were the owners. Then on the massive LED screen, the words appeared, "Aurora Hospitality. Founded by Rachel Carter, CEO, Mr. Carter Holdings." The room fell deathly silent. Through the camera, I saw my father frown, lips pursed. My mother tilted her head, stunned. Sophie dropped her champagne glass, the shatter piercing the heavy quiet. That was the moment I knew their silence could no longer hide the truth. It was out, undeniable. There's a rare moment in life when you step into a room you were only allowed to peek into as a child, and instead of trembling, you hold the mic. I lived that moment that night. The Aurora Harrington Boston Ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, the music faded, and the LED screen read, "Aurora Hospitality, founded by Rachel Carter." The air froze. Sophie's dropped glass still echoed, followed by stunned gazes. In that moment, I knew no further introduction was needed. The silence was the perfect soundtrack for my entrance. I stepped out from backstage, each click of my heels on the marble floor ringing clear. I wore a fitted navy dress, understated, no sequins, no drama. I didn't want to compete with the lights. I was the light. As I reached the podium, hundreds of eyes locked on me. Among them were gazes that never accepted my presence. My father sat at the main table, hands clasped, eyes narrowed as if analyzing a risky stock. My mother whispered to him while Sophie stared, pale as paper. I took a breath, smiled, and spoke calmly. "Good evening. I know many of you didn't expect to see me here. Honestly, neither did I. I wasn't invited. But I thought it was time to welcome you properly." A murmur rippled through the room like small waves. I paused, letting them absorb each word. "You're standing in the house I built, a house that started in a creaky Vermont attic with peeling paint and a squeaky ceiling fan. Tonight you're enjoying wine live music in its grown-up version, Aurora, Harrington, Boston." I looked at Sophie, rigid as if nailed to her chair. "I heard you told our staff the Carter family deserved priority because of our name. I don't blame you. But the truth is, you're being served tonight because I approved the contract, not because of your name, but because of my work." A sharp gasp came from the right table. I didn't need to look to know who was choking. I let the truth sink in. My father tilted his head, eyes hardening. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. For years, I was labeled a burden, mocked for housekeeping, crossed off invitations, but I didn't vanish. I built something you never thought I could. Tonight, I'm not here to prove anything to you, but to say, what you tried to erase still exists, stronger than ever. I heard a fork clink against a plate, someone trying to break the silence. It backfired. The room felt locked in that moment. A voice from the back called, "Rachel, is it really you?" I turned to see Aunt Janine, her face a mix of shock and emotion. She was the only one who'd slipped me lemon candies when I was left at the kids' table. I nodded, my answer. Back at the mic, a smile crossed my lips. "I know this truth is hard to swallow, but don't worry, there's still plenty of wine, fine food, and music tonight. Aurora always serves with kindness, even when its guests haven't been kind to me." A nervous laugh escaped somewhere, quickly stifled. I liked that. My subtle sarcasm kept them uneasy. I continued, "You're used to being served because of the Carter name. I chose to serve because of kindness. That's why Aurora exists." I set the mic down and stepped to the stage's edge. My heart pounded, but my soul felt light. For the first time, I wasn't an outsider at a Carter event. I was the host. My eyes swept the tables. Some younger relatives looked at me differently. Curious, admiring, maybe regretful. But I knew the real battle hadn't started. My father sat there, silent, his face colder than the chandeliers above. I knew he wouldn't easily admit anything. He never had. And perhaps after this welcome, an even bigger surprise awaited, a moment that would force everyone in that room to see my heart, not just my mind. There's an ironic moment when you've poured everything into revealing the truth, only for fate to throw a new challenge at you. I'd barely left the stage, hadn't even sipped water, when a chair crashed behind me. All eyes turned to the right corner. There, Uncle Hank, a tall, jovial man in his 70s, was slumping in his seat, face ashen, hands trembling over his chest. Screams erupted. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance!" People stood, but only fumbled, hands clasped, eyes panicked. My father stood too, but only whispered to my mother, not moving forward. Sophie stumbled back, more scared than concerned. I had no time to think. My body moved on instinct, as if programmed. I rushed to Hank, my voice firm. "Everyone, stay calm, lower his chair, support his head carefully. Hannah, call EMT now, report a possible cardiac issue with low blood pressure." My voice echoed through the ballroom, sharper than any meeting I'd attended. My Aurora staff sprang into action. Everett grabbed the first aid kit, another brought a portable blood pressure monitor. I knelt beside Hank, holding his hand, whispering, "I'm here. Breathe steady. It'll be okay." His eyes were cloudy, breath shallow, but he calmed at my voice. I had the staff set up the monitor, watching his pulse. The numbers were so low my heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady, hiding my fear. Around us, the Carter family stood frozen, clueless. I caught my father's eye, a mix of surprise and helplessness. For the first time, the man who preached strength is control had no answers, while the daughter he called a burden was running the room. When the ambulance arrived, everything was ready: temporary medical notes, blood pressure readings, emergency contacts. The EMTs took over seamlessly. Before being wheeled out, Hank gripped my hand, voice shaky. "You've got a heart bigger than this building, Rachel." His words choked me. A Carter had finally seen me, not with judgment, but gratitude. As the ballroom doors closed behind the stretcher, silence fell. The background music had stopped, leaving only hurried breaths. I stood, brushed dust off my dress, and faced them. "We can continue the party or stop, your choice. But tonight, you've seen that Aurora isn't just a hotel. It's a promise that anyone who steps here is treated with kindness and respect." I didn't need to say more. They'd seen it all. A few weak claps came from the back, where younger relatives sat. Then more. Finally, the ballroom erupted in applause. Not the hollow kind for speeches, but a genuine, resounding ovation. I looked down, catching Sophie's tense face, eyes red. She avoided my gaze. My father, arms crossed, face icy, but his eyes showed something had shifted. A reluctant acknowledgement, perhaps. Me? I felt no triumph, no victory here, just truth. I didn't just build Aurora with my mind, I sustained it with my heart. In my head, a question echoed. Was this the first time they realized I wasn't the burden, but the one carrying this room on my shoulders? As the party wound down, some relatives approached, shaking my hand, whispering, "We were wrong about you." A half apology, but enough to ease me. But I knew the real battle lay ahead. My father hadn't spoken, and I knew when he did it wouldn't be thanks. It would be a confrontation. They say silence is golden. But for the Carter family, silence was a weapon. They'd used it my whole life to erase me, to make me invisible. Yet that night, silence turned its blade on them. After Uncle Hank's incident, the ballroom settled into quiet. Hearts still raced from the chaos when my father stood. He slowly set his glass down, his usually steady hands trembling slightly. His voice, hoarse but clear, rang out. "You really own this place?" The question landed like a gavel in a courtroom. All eyes turned to me. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, calm. "Not just this place. 17 locations, 4 countries." I didn't need to boast or embellish. I laid the truth on the table like a card face up. The room went still. My mother's eyes darted, searching for a crack in my words, but there was none. Sophie bit her lip, face flushed as if swallowing a bitter truth. Some relatives looked away, avoiding my gaze, but at the back, younger cousins, still in college, had eyes sparkling, as if seeing a Carter break the mold for the first time. Silence shifted from contempt to awe. I heard whispers. "She really did it? Aurora is Rachel's?" My father stood there, face taut. For the first time, I saw him lose control. The man who called me a burden now faced the truth that I was carrying this room. "How did you do it?" he asked, voice hoarser. I smiled, shrugging. "By starting where no one else would. An old motel in Vermont. A place you'd never step foot in. Where I learned kindness can build a brand." My words landed, breaking into surprised murmurs. I didn't need to elaborate. They knew that motel was once my shame. Now it was Aurora's origin. A cousin, Lucas, just 20, spoke hesitantly. "Rachel, you really started from nothing?" I looked at him, nodding. Not just nothing, less than nothing. I had to carry the weight of their scorn, their mockery. He went quiet, but his eyes shone. In that moment, I wasn't just reclaiming my honor. I was opening a door for the next generation. A door to dare to be different. My father sat down, saying no more. He sipped his wine, eyes troubled. I saw it. The wall he'd built around himself was cracking. The ballroom's atmosphere changed. Before, when I entered family events, I faced judging stares, mocking laughs. Tonight I felt heavy silence, not exclusion, but acknowledgement, silence with no counter-argument. I let them sit with it. I didn't want to prolong my speech or dig further. The truth was enough. I stepped back, letting soft music fill the gaps in their minds. Honestly, in that moment, I felt no gloating, just relief. For the first time, silence wasn't against me, it was on my side. As the party continued, younger relatives approached, shyly starting conversations. Can you tell us more about Aurora? Are you planning to open in California? I answered briefly, but their eyes warmed me. They saw me not as an outcast, but a role model. My father stayed silent the rest of the night. Occasionally, I caught him looking at me, not with pure scorn, but something like regret. He didn't speak. I didn't expect him to. Words weren't his strength. Power was his language. That night after the party, I returned to my hotel office. On my desk was an envelope. Inside, an old photo of me at 8, beaming with a pitcher of lemonade on my grandparents' porch. Behind me, my father's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. A note on the back, "You were once part of us." Signed, Aunt Janine. I held the photo for a long time. My heart tightened, remembering a time I was accepted, then lost. But I was no longer the child waiting for approval. I was an adult, strong enough to stand even when family turned away. People often ask, if you could make your family beg for forgiveness, would you? Honestly, I once imagined it. My father stammering, Sophie bowing her head, the clan listening as I lectured. But when that moment came close, I realized revenge doesn't heal scars. Forgiveness does. The morning after the party, I returned to the ballroom. The scent of flowers lingered. Half-cleared wine glasses remained. Footprints on the carpet marked the chaotic night. Standing in the empty room, I thought of everything, from the mocked housekeeping badge to the renowned Aurora Empire. If I'd stopped at proving myself right, this story would be too small. I wanted more, to turn personal victory into opportunity for others. That afternoon, I invited the Carters, still in Boston, to a small meeting room in the hotel. They came with mixed emotions. My father, arms crossed, my mother, silent. Sophie, trying to seem composed but eyes red. I stood before them, no mic needed, just calm. Last night, I said you were standing in my house. Today, I want to add, this house isn't just for me. They murmured. I continued. Aurora will start a scholarship fund called Housekeeping to Hospitality. It's for anyone in the family who wants to study service, hospitality management, culinary arts, soft skills training. It doesn't matter who you are or where you start, as long as you're willing to learn. The room went silent. I saw young faces light up. Lucas, a teenage cousin, even leaned forward as if to ask right then. My father frowned, disbelieving. Rachel, you're using your money to fund these kids? He asked, voice torn between shock and suspicion. I smiled. Not funding, investing. Investing in people, something Carter Financial never understood. The words landed sharp but true. I didn't want to insult, but I wouldn't hide the truth. Sophie spoke, voice shaky. Why do this after everything we've done to you? I looked at her, steady. Because if I chose to exclude, I'd be no different from those who excluded me. The room fell silent, no one argued. Just then, Aunt Janine handed me an envelope. Inside, the same photo of 80-year-old me with the lemonade pitcher. The note, in her shaky but firm hand, "You're still part of this family." I choked up. After years of denial, one acknowledgement came. Not from my father, not my mother, but from someone brave enough to say what needed saying. I nodded, took her hand, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, alone, I went to the staff break room. The lights were still on. Housekeeping uniforms hung neatly, the old painted tables spotless. In a corner, I hung something on the wall. The wooden frame with my old housekeeping badge. I didn't hang it in my CEO office or a glass case. I hung it here, where staff could see it daily. I wanted them to know, no job is lowly. From cramped rooms and calloused hands, I built Aurora. As the nail pierced the wood, I felt an odd lightness. The journey had come full circle. From a mocked badge to an admired empire, back to a symbol of kindness. The next day, the press buzzed. Aurora Hospitality announces family scholarship, paving the way for the next generation. They hailed me as the woman who turned shame into legacy. I just smiled. The real value wasn't in headlines, but in the sparkling eyes of young Carters hearing about the scholarship. My father didn't say thank you, but for the first time, he placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing lightly. For a man like him, that was a speech. I stepped out of the Harrington, Boston's wind biting but my heart warm. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need anyone to kneel. I just needed to see change, even small, in the family that once denied me. And I had it. Looking back, I realized the greatest value wasn't in how many hotels I built or how much money I made. It was in turning pain and rejection into drive, mockery into a foundation, and above all, choosing forgiveness over vengeance. Because victory isn't making others bow, it's keeping your heart untainted by resentment. My story might resonate with many of you. Times you were belittled, excluded, even rejected by family. But remember, your worth doesn't depend on others' eyes. It's in how you choose to move forward. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment with your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Because who knows, the next story I tell might be the one you're waiting to hear.